Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Wargaming. I'm your host, Don Maidlow, and I've got a very special guest today. I have Vic. Hello, Vic.
Yo, Tom. Hi, everyone listening. Awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So Vic is a very competitive 40k player, and he has his own podcast called Fireside 40k Podcast on the YouTubes, and it's a great competitive 40k I guess like channel, because all you do is talk about what's hot with the meta. You talk about what like events you guys have been to, and you've got your co-host David Gaylard, who's also been on this podcast before when he was on for the LVO special. Yeah, it's great to have you on. It's great to have you on.
Yeah. Cheers, man. Thanks for that introduction. And yeah, thanks for shouting out 40k Fireside. I mean, I think you know all about this. You can just kind of talk about 40k and it just makes
Yeah.
content by itself, especially when you're attending tournaments and things, meeting people. So yeah, that's been a great change for me over the last season, just kind of creating content for the community.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think it's great because if you go to regular events like me and you do, there's always something to talk about. And as all the new armies come out, the data slates come out, it's just always just a revolving door of stuff you can talk about. And there's a lot of stuff that happened at Manchester, which we're going to talk about later, which I think is going to be a shock to everyone. What single unit has come out as the one that everyone's taking. So we'll go into that in a little bit. So I've got to do a few shout outs first, Vic. So I've got a shout out to Fourth Dimension Printing, who is a printing service, and they will 3D print all your Warhammer miniatures. The links will be below, and he runs his own business, and he printed all my demons, which you've had the pleasure of playing, Vic, and they're great. They're the correct scale. Everything looks perfect, and the attention to detail on the models is fantastic. So definitely check them out. And also, big shout out to East Anglia Slam, who are running their first ever super major, and this is going to be happening in September the 2nd. And it's run by the East Anglia GT guys, who are running doubles tournaments, RTTs, GTs all the time. And this time they're getting a band of brothers together to basically make a brand new super major. And they've got 4 different companies which are coming together, and they're going to have 4 different train sets, and it's going to be fantastic. So I hope everyone who's watching this checks them out. The link's going to be below, and we will see you there. Right, now the shout outs are out of the way, so let's get into it. So last season, Vic, you really did push for like one of the being one of the top players in the world. Let's talk about that. So how did last season go for you?
Yeah, I mean, last season was my best season so far. I've been playing competitive 40k for a while, and it's kind of the culmination of all that experience came together last season, and I had a really good run. I was quite consistent through most of the events, and obviously we had big changes with a lot of big events happening in the UK, so I had an opportunity to compete for the ITC rankings. Yeah, I mean, I won a couple of super majors, which is pretty awesome. Like, I've never done that before. That's pretty cool. And yeah, by the end of the season, I was kind of going into LVO rank number 1. I didn't do so well in LVO. I lost a game in the run up to it, and yeah, I ended up finishing 2nd in the world in the ITC rankings, which I couldn't really have expected that. So I'll take it.
Yeah, man, that is honestly outstanding, and all of the guys in the UK were rooting for you. When we were seeing all your pairings come up, we'd be like, "Come on, we need Vic to win. We need Vic to win. Come on, knock Jack Harpster off. Come on, you can do this. You can do this." So we were all all on your side the entire way through, and you just had such a good season, and it's great to kind of see that UK players are actually competing in the ITC now, because before it used to be it would be Art of War winning it every single year after year. They would just smash out the park because they had all the big tournaments, because it's different to the UK. We're such a small country, countries, that we kind of just have like we used to have a tournament in London, used to have a tournament over there, a tournament over there. But in the US, you'd have everyone coming from the state and flying all over the place. So you'd have these like Adepticons and all these different things, which used to be huge points winners. And I don't know if the pool of player skill is as high a level as it is at our events, considering how small and captivated our kind of like audiences for the UKTC. But now with Zach's tournaments and bringing the UKTC as a way to kind of generate points for us, we've got these two seasons. We've got the ITC season, we've got the UKTC season, which starts and ends with LVO. Then we've got the UKTC, which starts and ends with the London GT. So what's your thoughts on kind of what's happened with the UKTC? Because it kind of gradually started to pop up, and then just after COVID, bang, we had an event every single month, a super major in every city. It's been great.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on quite a few different points there that are really critical to kind of the success that we've seen in the UK competitive scene in 40K. And one of the main ones is that we only really had access to London GT and then kind of a splattering of little GTs across the country until very recently. So that's why the American players tended to do a lot better in the ITC rankings. Now we've got a situation where the top 5 in the ITC rankings last year were 4 of them were English players, UK players, which is pretty wild. And then obviously we have a large concentration of all of the players, including all of the best players, going to all of the events, all of the large events, which is something different from America. So what that does is not only do the top players compete more amongst themselves, but it also brings everyone else up because they're kind of regularly playing against really good players who are better than them, and everyone develops. So we ended up in a situation now where the UK competitive scene is very competitive. Everyone kind of knows their rules, plays kind of with good sportsmanship. It's a very developed competitive scene. And I think you can really see that contrast when you go, like when I went to LVO, I really felt that contrast. And I know like a bunch of other players, like Nas just went to Adepticon and he won that. And, you know, he's got his little banner saying US meta soft, you know. So you get all of these things and you really feel it. The UK meta is amazing. Like the level of player skill involved is incredible. And that's across the board. That's not just in the top 10%. That's across the entire board. So yeah, big up to Zach for kind of working so hard, taking on feedback and developing the UK scene with his super major events. It's something that I think will continue to grow as well across this year. You just mentioned a new super major, so yeah, it keeps developing.
Yeah, it's just getting from strength to strength, and I'm sure one day we'll get to the point where there's going to be like Manchester GT will be on, let's say, this Sunday, but also the same Sunday there's going to be like Belfast GT, and they're both 200-man player events, and you're like, oh my god, which top players are going to go to which, and then you do the gamble to see if you can get the easier run. But yeah, it's been quite crazy with how quickly all these events come up and how regular they are. I do think with 10th edition coming out that there is going to be some a few teething problems at the start of the summer, because they mentioned in a post that they're redoing terrain.
Oh dear.
I love terrain. I love the way it is right now. Like, having the obscuring keyword has just changed the game completely. And the way that kind of Zach's got his event set up, which is, for those who don't go to the events, he basically has a mission pack, and now and again things change, but it's usually the same missions every single time. So you can kind of list build to the terrain types. You can get angles in certain areas, and over the years, it has actually changed in. Because I think it was London, one of the London Open events I went to, it had 2 of the big square obscuring buildings on each player side. And I was like, wow, that's too much. That's way too much. And then he took them away and took out an L of the next event. I was like, oh, that's too little. And then eventually it's kind of got to this really good standard now where it just works and it's very even. And I know it's in some aspects it just favors shooting armies, but then if it did favor combat armies, there's a few combat armies like World Eaters that would probably wreak havoc. So it's absolutely fine. But what do you think? What do you think they could possibly change in 10th with the terrain?
So I haven't heard any rumors. I don't know. Have you heard rumors, Tom? Do you
No,
know something I don't know?
no, I don't know anything like that. It's more the fact that there was like I saw it in one of the many discords I'm in. It was just like, oh look, they highlighted terrain as being adjusted, and I was like, okay, please don't do that. Maybe it's to make their terrain better, because their terrain is rubbish. It's just a square, a perspex square, which they don't sell, and you put your models on it. So maybe it's to make their buildings, the ones that actually sell, to be more desirable for tournament goers, I guess. But because they are kind of losing the market with the third party with is it TT Combat?
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if they kind of took some of the good concepts from the current terrain sets, like the actual area terrain rules, obscuring rules, light cover, heavy cover, light cover, and dense cover is actually quite well designed.
Yeah.
But then, some of their rules for obstacles and so on, ruined walls, they're not very intuitive. And, taking portions of it and then improving on it would be ideal. Obviously, you never know which direction they're going to go, but there's only so many variables that they can work with on terrain from here. From a keyword system is kind of quite all encompassing.
Yeah.
So I would be very surprised if they completely overhaul it so that, terrain is completely different to where it is. So I'm expecting that most terrain formats that exist now are able to be adapted to a new rule set, but that's quite optimistic. We'll see.
I just keep thinking they're just going to like a sledgehammer to it, and then we see in like a few weeks' time, it's going to be like, okay, cool. So now all terrain, you can assign the keywords yourself in the game. What?
You got to spend the CP.
Do you remember? I think it was in 7th when the psychic discipline came out, where you could pick terrain up and move it. It was like you basically used to load up all of your I think it was like hammerheads and all of that on a fortress or redemption or something like that, and then a landing pad, that was it. And you used to be able to move the landing pad with psychic power, and if it landed on any enemies, they would all instantly die with D-weapon hits. And it just used to be bonkers, but that was that was fun.
We've come out the other side of that nonsense, but
yeah. There's parts of me which do love looking back at 7th, because it was just absolute nuts. Like I went to a tournament in 7th with then it was the Necron Reclamation Legion just came out, and it was beyond broken. And I literally just took with me the models I have, and I wasn't even a competitive player back then. I was just like, my mate was just like, "Oh, come to the tournament, fine, whatever." I ended up coming second in this like it was like 60 person GT, and it was because every time you'd have a 4-up reanimation, and you get to re-roll the ones, and then at the end of the turn you get to do it again, so you just never die. And it was just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So, anyway, that's enough about 7th. That was just nonsense. Yeah, but yeah, well, I've forgotten where I was. So yeah, with the UKTC, obviously there's things been changing over the years. With there was always been these like big teams. So Dice Down has always been around, and they've always done well. They were kind of like the OGs, and then then Vanguard kind of cropped up, and then they started doing well and doing well. And last year, the surprise faction was War Masters, who kind of came out of nowhere and were just like, we're here, we're ready, we've got our star player, we've got our shiny Charles and Nassim. And then there's been a few crop up this year, and there's a new one called Ignite, isn't there?
So, I mean, there's so many great teams in the UK, and they just keep developing and growing. And, we've had new teams pop up, and Team Ignite is one that me and Dave have set up, along with Jokel Johansson from Iceland and Brian Seep. And we kind of set it up just to try and collect a few competitive, like-minded players together, as most teams are set up kind of like that. Nothing against Dice Down. I mean, I still really get on with the guys, and it was kind of more that they're a little bit less active now, and we just wanted a team of active players. So it's not like we're not friends anymore. And really, the thing is, we wanted to collect some of the best players who kind of got on with us in Europe, and try and set up for a situation where if the game continues to develop as quick as it has, it's going to hit esports territory at some point. It's going to start kind of really blowing up. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens over the next 2 or 3 years. So we just want to kind of be prepared for that transition in 40K. And we don't want maybe, some of the American teams out of war just to have free reign over this kind of thing.
Yeah.
At least we're going to try and compete against them a little bit.
Yeah. When I saw that you kind of done your own thing, I was kind of like, that's genius, because like it makes total sense, because I actually think it is, like you said, I actually think it is going to be an esports one day. I think you're going to have to make it a bit of a shorter game to be an esports, maybe like hour and a half, maybe
Mhm.
2 hours maximum, I guess. Just because to get the audience, because eventually with esports, the end goal for every esport is to have a stadium full of people whilst people watching people play.
Mhm.
So unless it's going to be like in the first Harry Potter film where they're doing the chess, if it's going to be like that where we're just riding models, I mean, I don't know, but yeah, I think eventually it's got everything that we can think about with esports, and like all of the teams are getting esports jerseys now, which is absolutely fantastic, and it's nice to actually see all these different teams popping about with the jerseys.
True.
Like at Manchester, I was kind of looking around the room, being like, I haven't seen that jersey before. Like, oh, that's cool. That's just an entire jersey on fire. That's wicked. And there's all these different ones come out. I know, I think one of my favorite jerseys is actually the 6++ jersey,
Yes, it's great.
because it's just like the techie sort of hexagon sort of shapes which fade from the bottom up, and it's just sweet. It's just really sweet. So that's kind of cool. Have you got jerseys in mind?
No, we're just finalizing our logo and things at the moment. Well, the main thing we're focusing on is just kind of bringing the team together. We want to try and hit 7 players if we can. I mean, we just got Liam VSL added to the team.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we just asked Chris Radford. He wanted to join the team, so it's another top UK player.
You got
Uh,
Chris.
exactly.
Oh
So
wow, yeah, I love Chris. He's such a good dude.
yeah, and he's such an up and coming player with so much potential and plays the game like exactly how you want to play the game.
Yeah,
So he's a perfect match. So yeah, it's all just kind of coming together slowly, and then we can focus on the jersey and the website and stuff like that. So we've got a few ideas, but we'll see what direction it all goes. At the end of the day, it is still a hobby for all of us. It's not
yeah,
like our full-time job or anything.
yeah.
So we're just it's still a thing on the side. We'll see how much it grows, but I don't think it's gonna necessarily hit like StarCraft, Hearthstone kind of levels. But it could still be like a really important hobby in our lives as it goes forward.
I hope so. I really hope so, because I kind of love it. It's kind of cool. It's like
Good game.
now my missus is on board with it. If it was like just coming out of lockdown, I was just like, she was like, why don't you go to events? You like you'll have fun. And then now it's turned into this thing where I've got a channel. I've had multiple podcasts, and
Mhm.
like I've now this is my second team I'm part of now. Shout out to Mind Goblins. Whoop. And and then she sees just this sea of miniatures I have now, and she's just like, why don't you get rid of some? I was like, no, I need it just in case the meta changes. And she's like, why? When is it going to change? Probably in like a year and a half time. So this is going to sit here for a year and a half before. But then she's now seeing that like I starting to get results, got the team and all these different things, and she's now like fully on it. And I think it wasn't Manchester. It was the one before that. I think it was like Twisted Warp. I actually got a text from her, and she gave me like a full like, "Come on, Darby, you can do this." And I was like, "Yes, she's on board."
Oh, that's amazing, man. That's amazing.
Yeah,
It gives us such a sense of fulfillment, doesn't it? This kind
it
of
does.
hobby.
It
So
does.
yeah.
Especially it was like we all spend so much of our like time either painting, talking about it, and just being part of all these communities. It takes a lot of the time. So it's nice that like if it does go to esports, it's like a reward for everyone, which is kind of good. So we randomly talked a few times then about the Manchester GT, which we both went to, and
Yeah,
we both played each other.
we did. We got a game in, was that, which is pretty
We did.
awesome,
So
actually.
it was it's the second time we played, and it's the second time it's been the second day first game.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we played Birmingham last year, when I was playing Quins and you were playing Eldar again, but it was Halo Doom. And then this time I was playing Demons. You were playing Eldar again, but not
Yes,
Halo Doom. But you did have some spicy Harlequins in there.
I did.
Can you just tell everyone what was your list?
Yeah, so my list, it was quite like an interesting concept. It's not really out there, so I'll share the details with it. So I was running a custom craft world which had ignore light cover, and it had reroll a wound roll. And I had a bunch of artillery in this list. So just to run you through it, I started off with a Farseer Skyrunner, no guide or doom, just executioner and gain a CP. I had Baharoth, 5 ranges, 6 dire avengers, 5 striking scorpions. I had a Warlock Skyrunner, and then it started to get a little bit more spicy. I had 2 units of Shroud Runners and a Viper, and then I had a Wraithseer, who uses a Raidseer? But
Yeah, I know.
Raidseer was clutch in this tournament. The Raidseer has a D cannon on top and runs Quicken and Restrain. And then I had a Night Spinner with Crystal Targeting Matrix, so it ignores modifiers, and 3 single D cannon platforms just to take advantage of the reroll wound. I had a little light traveling patrol detachment with a Shadow Seer, with Fog of Dreams, a really interesting spell, kind of effective in this meta, and also Mirror of Minds, so kind of my second executioner. And then 2 units of 5 troops, 2 Star Weavers, and the Death Jester of Doom, just to finish off that list. So yeah, it had a lot of little tools there, a lot of indirect fire between the. It's not just the actual indirect fire. There's also the psychic powers which don't need line of sight. So the damage really adds up. When it worked. It really worked. It was a bit experimental, but it was all right.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked through the list, I was just like, okay, so it's got this, it's got that, it's got single ones of this and this, and then I scrolled down. I was like, please don't have any Harlequins. Please don't have any Harlequins, because I was just like, I can deal with this unless he has Harlequins. I went like this. God damn it! Because I know what the Death Jester does, and he's so efficient. Like he's so worth his points, and being like the fact he can just like stop my secondaries is just mad, because the demon secondary people don't know there's one where you can basically do an action on objectives and you take it into the banners and you basically just surround the character with flesh hounds and bloodletters, and then you just go 4/4/4 in the turn and you get 12 points, and then you put the opponent on the back foot. But against your list I couldn't do that because you had the targeting mortal wound spells and then the Death Jester, so I couldn't do the trick, and it was really very frustrating. But it was a very fun game. It, like always, it's very cagey, and then bang, there's some big damage splatting around, and I was absolutely desperate for first turn. Absolutely.
Oh
desperate.
yeah, it's the only game I went first in the tournament.
Yeah, I know.
Oh yeah.
I think that was the only game I went second as well.
Oh,
Was
it's a big
against
swing.
you. Yeah, so I basically set up all these tricks and stuff like this, and it's better for me to go second because then I can start doing it's better for my warp storm as well to go second. So but no, it was a really good game. It was tight. It was anything, was it 10
Very
points?
close, yeah. It was really close, and there were so many little swings in the game. Like the score isn't even reflective of how close the game was.
Yeah.
And there were so many moments where it could have just swung completely the other way. There were moments where I was like, "Oh no, my psychic phase has gone wrong. Bellicore's standing in front of me. I'm just done." And it just kind of like swung back, and it was an awesome game.
It was such a weird one because I had to keep Bellacore on this one objective simply because that was where you had decided to basically host your army on my side and your side of the board. So you had little units coming down, all these different units coming down, and I just had to have him there, because if I didn't have him there, you would just overwhelm that flank. As much as I wanted to just throw him at you, like, because he's just so hard to kill. But it was very tight. It was very tight. So your matchups during the weekend. So let's go. You don't have to go through the games, but like, what did you have round per round?
Well, I started off with 2 orc matchups. I was really happy with this. I thought, oh, I'm going to play orcs all 5 rounds. I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then it started to deteriorate from there. So then I hit my first Desolation Marine matchup. So I played Desolation Marines in Space Wolves. This was Chris Radford.
Yes.
Which are tough. And then I hit you. Great. Demons is a really tough one, actually, for this Eldar list. And then finally, I played against Alex Petford with Dark Angels. He had 20 Terminators and 10 Desolation Marines. So that's a rough matchup as well. And that was about the worst list possible because he had 2C. He's the only player who starts on 2 CP out of the Dark Angels list. And 2 CP allows him to pre-game move a unit. So if he gets first turn, he can essentially throw either a Talon Master or he has 1 unit of 3 Land Speeders 38 inches forward. So that's an alpha strike you don't want to have to deal with as Eldar, because then you can charge, and then after you charge, you consolidate 19 inches back out. So you can just basically get a free alpha strike. Alex had this and he went first. So this was like nightmare territory, but the list actually surprised me. There were all of the correct tools in there, as long as you don't make too many mistakes or any mistake. Ideally in that matchup, you need no mistakes to actually stand a chance. But it's fortunately designed in such a way that the Desolation Marines aren't perfect into this list. Light Harlequins are great. The Wraithseer allows me to basically put the Wraithseer forward and all my characters just tuck in behind him.
Well, yeah.
So I got a bit lucky with my list design because I really didn't predict how this meta was going to be at this tournament.
I know. God, yeah. So let's talk about how that last game went. So obviously
Sure.
you're undefeated going into this, and it was you played some orcs, then you played Chris, you played me, and then you're like, God, okay, so now this is where game 5, this is where it really gets heated. Not as in like heated between players, but this is the top meta list, and people have been hammering all event. So going into there's a lot of Eldar players that do watch this channel. So going into the mindset of playing into a list where they got all this indirect and they got all the terminators, how do you kind of deploy and how do you kind of set up traps?
Sure. So first of all, you've got to consider your list design and the different outputs that you have in the list. Eldar basically work on kind of like they do spike damage. I don't know if you ever played games where you can kind of like concentrate all your firepower into one area, and they have the mobility to do that very well. So once you know the output profiles, you can start to cater for the meta. And in this case, the Dark Angels Terminator build was a list that was present in the meta, and it's a list that you can consider if you're able to actually deal with. So I had prepared for dealing with 2 units of 10 Terminators. 1 unit of 10 Terminators I can just about kill if I put all of my mortal wounds into it, a little bit of combat, and the D cannons activating with blast. So the reason I went for the reroll a wound and 3 individual D cannons is that it really helps to get around can only be wounded on 4+. The transhuman ability of Deathwing Terminators. Having a reroll to wound on all of those really ups the damage. So each D cannon that goes through usually kills a Terminator.
Nice.
So you can end up maybe killing 3 or 4 Terminators just between these 3 or 4 D cannons in the list. And then, the mortal wounds can kill 3 or 4. And then combat can just about pick up the last 2 just with mortal wounds. So you don't actually have to kind of, don't have to try anything. The Harlequins can just go and spend 2 CP and usually can do up to 6 mortal wounds. So you've got that 1 unit dealt with. The second unit can be dealt with by using movement control. I have restrain in the list, so just half their movement, and then the Shroud Runners can minus D3 from the movement of the other unit. So you can pin another unit in place. And then it just becomes a matter of, can you deal with the land speeders kind of out attritioning you? If you build in the Death Jester and you build in lots of sniper rifles into the list, you can pick up Talon Masters, the Banner Guy, the Apothecary. And in this game, I also took Assassinate just to kind of keep his characters really pinned back. As soon as the Terminators get out of support of the characters, they become much more fragile. So there's lots of layers to this that you kind of build in. And the list, the flow of the game basically went how you would expect, where he kind of pushes forward with the Terminators and throws land speeders at me to try and get behind enemy lines. You start winning the game if you can kill a Terminator blob, control another Terminator blob, and start picking away at the land speeders before they score behind enemy lines. And then the pressure really ramps up because he has to start using Talon Masters to get behind enemy lines. And that's when he runs out of resources. On top of that, I was running a Solitaire in this army as well.
Cheek Solitaire. Very nice.
The Solitaire was specific tech for the Ravenwing matchup because he has very good profiles into the Ravenwing units. So he can potentially kill 2 Talon Masters if they're standing next to each other in one activation with +1 damage and use CP reroll a hit roll. It's really right around average. And he can pick up attack bikes, and he can also reach the Desolation Marines, which was the big thing. That's kind of, if you can forward position the Solitaire in a place where he can then attack the Desolation Marines the turn after, you can create problems for the Dark Angels player. So I basically set up my Death Jester on one side so he can move 22 inches in the boat and then shoot some Desolation Marines, and then the Solitaires on the other side kind of threatening 22 inches as well with a charge. So Alex was a little bit pinned. He lost 5 Desolation Marines early, and then he lost 10 Terminators in the mid game. He lost most of his land speeders in the mid game as well. And then by the end game, he was just working on scraps with a full unit of Terminators just struggling to move. They were just static, basically. So I ended up winning that game. Actually, that game was much more of a decisive victory for the Eldar than my game against you. The game against you was very, very close, but the game against the Dark Angels was actually much more comfortable. Just quite surprising.
Glad to hear that. That's good. Well, yeah. The demons are a bit more tricky to deal with than if there's just big units just here and here. You go, cool, mortal wounds, everything into there, Durham Rangers, everything just into a unit, because then you can pick it up. When demons kind of play a little bit like Eldar, but they have a Be'lakor as well, so it's a very strange one. Okay, so that's nice to kind of understand like your thought process going into that sort of like very resilient matchup. And would you consider, if you I mean, there's the Birmingham teams tournament which is coming up next month, I think it is. For those people who are going and they are thinking about maybe potentially taking an Eldar like player or list to the event, is that a good matchup for a teams? Can they reduce that score that it's either a draw or a win?
So Eldar are really interesting in teams because in teams you get the option of avoiding certain matchups. You can avoid the indirect fire matchup.
Yeah.
And I think the experiment for me in this singles event was really interesting because I went in with a list that could handle indirect fire and saw how it would play. And you can build the tools to deal with it. But in a teams environment, you probably want to try and push the differential as the Eldar player. You want to try and actually get bigger wins if you can.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of success in Europe with people in teams events. Liam VSL, Duda from Poland. These guys are all just like doing really well with mixed Aeldari lists.
Yeah.
Where they're able to play kind of the units on foot, Howling Banshees on foot, Shining Spears, those kinds of things. Those units that you can't really run in a singles event because you're going to hit indirect fire and they're going to get too much value. So in a teams environment, Eldar is so good. And if you can kind of just build for a lot of pressure, you can really push big scores. And I think personally, I feel like it used to be Harlequins, pure Harlequins were the go-to for a team's list if you were going to pick something from the Eldari super faction. Now I think kind of, Craft Worlds and mixed Craft Worlds, Harlequins and Eldar is probably the strongest one for a team's environment.
Would you say the mixed over Ynnari?
Yeah, I probably would. I think kind of being able to ignore light cover opens up a lot of matchups against Marines.
It does, yeah.
Ynnari are very, very good, actually. And, any Alpha Strike list is going to be good in teams events. So that's perfectly fine. I think that you get a wider range of good matchups if you run the mixed Aeldari. And you also have an option to play into indirect fire and still score like a 6 out of 20 or a 6-14 or 8. Yeah. And you saw that at Home Nations this last weekend. Ramsey from Team England, he like paired into Innis with his Iron Hands and Desolation Marines. He paired into Guard, and he took only small losses. He got 8 points out of that, out of 20. So with an Eldar mixed list with no indirect fire. So that just shows that you can really play defensively if you can get board choice against these lists. So yeah, I think I would go Harlequins and Eldar combined as the go-to build, both in singles and team play at the moment.
That's cool. That's good to know. It's also good to know for me because I might put in a little work in for some Eldar. But so speaking of teams events, you've got some experience in them. What would you say let's say if you've got to pick 5 factions for, is it 5 or 4? It's 5, isn't it? The 5 players in teams.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you had to pick the 5, what would be the 5 to go for right now as the meta is?
As the meta is, I think you've got to take a Space Marine list. I would probably go for Dark Angels out of anything. I think they have the widest range of good matchups, and that's probably my number 1 pick. That would just go straight in. Next, I'd probably go for Guard. I think Imperial Guard are really, really good at the moment. I would go Eldar because I love Eldar. Eldar are awesome. And then, I mean, you have a few options. You could run GSC if you have a very competent GSC player. I think that's a very powerful list in teams.
Very tricky to play, though.
Yeah, very, very. You have to have like someone who's a faction specialist to do it. I also really love demons. I think there's a whole load of armies that could fit into kind of the last 2 slots. And I think demons, even orcs, you can go for world eaters, all of these kind of pressure armies. Yeah, that can push a big differential is really strong in teams. So I think as the meta is, teams is extremely good. It's not a great meta for singles, but it's a great meta for teams because so many armies are viable in the last few slots in a team's composition. So yeah, I think this is a good time for teams events. So I'm glad we're getting more of them in the UK.
Yeah, I am as well. I almost kind of wish that there was like like doubles and trios were like a thing, but like a big super major levels where you get like 300 people playing doubles or something like that, because it could be quite cool.
That'd be wild.
Yeah, because like you and David could just be like stomping around. It's like the dream team. Um, so yeah, we talked about top factions for teams. Right now, your top three factions for singles would be.
I think. Am I allowed to pick multiple Space Marine factions? Because
You can, you
it would just
can.
be Dark Angels, Iron Hands, and Space Wolves as it stands, with
Wow.
Imperial Guard just tucking in behind it. And then the last one's a little bit tricky. I don't know. What do you think, Dom? I think Demons are up there. So is Eldar. They're kind of on a similar level.
They're they're
Um,
they're they're the skill-based armies which like yes, they're very good and they're getting a lot of win weights, but they're the sort of armies where you can't just pick up. Like you need a lot of reps and to really understand like the dynamics of how everything works. And I'm still even learning demons, but I think actually I know this like World Eaters players now are going to be screaming at the keyboard, going, no, they're not easy to play, but World Eaters are insanely good at scoring in singles
mhm.
because they can just passively score whilst killing you. And if they go first and you've got no way to screen, they are in your deployment zone turn one before you get to have a go. And then let's say they get both charges off, which they probably do because they go 22 inches. They sweep 2 units and tag 2 units. Then you've now got to retaliate without those assets, and you're probably like maybe like 200 points down or more. So I actually think they might be creeping up. I think you're right. I think it is because of the nerf guns. We're seeing 1, 2, 3 as Space Marines, but then underneath, I think you've maybe got a couple of skill faction armies, demons, Eldar, and then I think orcs are good,
Mhm.
but maybe World Eaters, but the fact that they can just passively score and be super aggressive and a little bit of a dum dum army.
Yeah, they're going to be good in singles and teams. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a lot like GSC. Once people get the hang of these kinds of armies and how the mechanics work, it's a lot easier to deal with them.
yeah,
So I think they might fall down towards the top end of a singles event, like really struggle to actually push through for the tournament win. But I
yeah,
think we'll always get consistent results with those kinds of armies. World Eater's a good example of it.
yeah. So before we were chatting before we hit record, and you said the term of indirect war. So let's go a bit into this indirect war. But before we go into the indirect war, I just want to ask how, if you were writing the rules, how would you fix these issues we're having now at the moment, where indirect is coming back in a big way? Less so with like Eldar and everything like that, but it's more the Desolation Marines. How would you fix the interaction they have with the game?
I see. I don't think it needs necessarily a core rule change. Because I think the blanket nerf to indirect fire is actually a very good one. It's a very
Yeah, I
logical
agree.
one.
Yeah,
But what the problem with Games Workshop and their ability to balance indirect fire is that they struggle where one unit slips through the cracks and it's too
mm,
good. And as soon as a single unit is too good, so even mortars fall into this category,
yeah,
where a single unit is too good and it's indirect fire, it causes such kind of a ripple effect through the meta
mm,
where so many armies are not able to function anymore. And you end up with a very narrow range of units that work. And that's when we start getting the great indirect wars. I've
mm.
lived through many of these,
Yeah.
and we're just
Sure.
starting to go through another one where the Desolation Marines have a really powerful indirect fire profile, which is nowhere near as strong as previous indirect fire wars, but they're still good enough that they completely skew the meta.
Yeah.
That Vengor launcher and even the really small Castellan launcher being AP2 means that a lot of armies do not have a counter
Yeah.
to surviving the level of attrition that you get from them across the course of a game. And you end up with a situation where the only ways you can survive is either if you outkill them, like you kill their indirect fire with your indirect fire, and that's what the escalation of indirect fire goes like that, or you kind of hit them with an alpha strike and get into their indirect fire or kind of table them really, really quickly. And then you end up with situations where you need to go first to win either of those situations.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the indirect fire isn't so potent that you can't build the correct defensive profiles against it. But even armies like Imperial Guard, which were amazing, really suffer in this meta because all of their infantry is the exact wrong profile to try and survive this kind of indirect fire.
Yeah, I
And
find this.
nobody's going to shed a tear for Astra Militarum at the moment, but think about Sisters of Battle, GSC, like demons, little demons.
Yeah.
All of these armies become invalidated by this kind of profile of indirect fire at a competitive level.
Yeah.
And it's a real shame, to be honest. It's awful when it happens, and it just really goes out of control if a change is not done quickly.
Yeah, it is annoying because it's like I put Drukhari to bed when
No.
after teams, and I noticed how many guard people were taking triple mortars. I was like, oh god, what if they start bringing in manticores as well? And then the Desolation come out. I was like, okay, Drukhari are in the box, because the way Drukhari play, just similar to Eldar, they're very tradey, but the way they like to do, they like to stick stuff in the open, you kill them, then they jump behind terrain, and then they're safe. But now they can't do that because they got all the mortars. So you got one mortar squad picking up a venom, then the next mortar kills the incubi inside, the next mortar kills Drazar, and it's just a super feel bad. And also, I'm very angry about the indirect as well, because demons don't get +1 to their save, and it's so annoying. It's so
Yeah,
annoying.
of course. So, I
Oh.
mean, in terms of corrections, it's very simple. I think, each of these units, like the mortars, can be very easily corrected by for example, losing core on heavy weapons teams, so they don't get any rerolls, they can't be affected by the finial, and that alone is enough to correct them.
Yeah.
The Desolation Marines, if Devastator Doctrine is the problem across the board here. If that doesn't exist beyond turn one, so it's how it was before, then they only have AP2 for a single turn. Codex Warfare doesn't get completely out of hand for their secondary scoring, and AP1 indirect fire is much easier for people to deal with, and they're a very expensive unit. So I think their efficiency drops down enough that you only take maybe one unit as a tech choice, and that's how I think indirect fire should sit. They should be significantly overpriced for their output to make sure that they can't be spammed and completely ruin the competitive meta.
Yeah, I agree. So what would you take as an Eldar specialist at the moment? Give me 2 units that you think are almost essential for dealing with this indirect war.
So I'm going to do it from a surviving perspective and a killing perspective.
Nice, I like it.
From a surviving perspective, I think light Harlequins are very, very good. A lot of these Desolation Marine squads are hitting on 2s with their very good guns. And light immediately means you can only be hit on 4s, no rerolls on the boats, which significantly drops their output. It gets very, very swingy for them. Yeah. And in my last game at Manchester, Alex shot all his Desolation Marines into a Starweaver, and the Starweaver survived with 2
what
wounds
a
left.
hero.
So, and that's with him rolling like normally, So it's a very powerful defensive trait to only be hit on 4s. From a killing perspective, I think Eldar do have one of the best sets of indirect fire in the game, and it's balanced. It's at the correct kind of output level. The Night Spinner is very effective profile both into mortars and into Desolation Marines. At strength 7, -2 damage with very easy access to ignore cover. In my list, it rerolls a wound as well, which increases the efficiency. And kind of on average in that setup, it'll kill 2 Desolation Marines. So 2 Night Spinners will kill 4 Desolation Marines. And then you start winning the indirect war because the Night Spinners can't be killed by the Desolation Marines indirectly because they're T7. So that's one bit of tech that Eldar players can start looking at potentially. But Night Spinners are a bit bulky, hard to hide. So there's drawbacks to it as well. And they're actually not that efficient in terms of output for their points cost.
Yeah, they're super expensive, and I always thought they looked super cool. And even the turret always reminds me of something that would have been like Jedi Starfighter or something like that. It's just like a little spaceship by itself.
So cool.
So that's quite interesting. Do you think with the resurgence of these sorts of guns, do you think you're going to see more wraiths coming back?
Wraith units. I mean, I love my Wraiths here.
Yeah.
I just took it because I painted up the model, like converted him a little bit, and I thought he'd be really cool. But he's actually a very good tech piece for holding on to quicken and restrain without getting killed by indirect fire. He
Yeah.
can't die from perils. He's T8 -1 damage, so the Vengor launchers are ineffective against him. And yeah, the problem with the Wraith units is that they're all significantly overpriced for their defensive profile. So, you know, if it was a newer codex, you probably would have them at the right points cost to justify them. Their output and their defense is too low to kind of really take and make the rest of your list look good. Like the Raizia at 170 points is outrageous. It's way too expensive for what it is. But in this current meta, you're looking for any individual tech piece that will help you. So, you know, I took a Raizia, but you can take a Wraith Lord for 100 points, which will do the same job, just protecting your characters.
Yeah.
But every unit you pick has to have a specific role that works positively for you in this meta. You're already playing at a disadvantage by running a faction like Eldar, so you can't like make the mistake of running 2 units of Howling Banshees on foot because you'll just lose the game. You need every single advantage you can get.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of you kind of redo all the old Eldar lists because now you're not safe anymore because we've had this beautiful like 6 months of where we can just be frolicking about with no transports and it's absolutely amazing because you don't have to spend all these points on these expensive transports because they're very expensive. It's kind of interesting. I have been thinking about Eldar, but I like the dark stuff too much. I guess I'm a nice guy in person, so I play with the dark stuff in reality. But yeah, so you've got an event coming up called London Open. Don't reveal your list because obviously a competitive advantage for everyone else. But if you were going to this sort of London Open on the weekend, what would be your predictions for like the top armies? Like I guess it's kind of the same thing you said with the top meta picks, but do you think it's going to be the same? Do you reckon Guard are going to start creeping up because they haven't actually been doing well?
Yeah, I think this is a very hostile meta. Like people said it was a hostile meta for Eldar, but I think it's an even more hostile meta for Guard. Guard have a very large footprint, so they can't hide from the direct fire of the Desolation Marines. We didn't even touch on that. They each carry a Dark Lance.
No.
And it's not ideal if you don't have invulnerable saves. So the Desolation Marines are a massive problem for Guard, regardless of how they try and tailor their list. So I think Guard will still struggle until there's a correction. And unfortunately, the time has passed for the balanced data slate to be released and affect Marines in any way before London Open. So London Open will be this current meta, which is so I'm expecting like most of the really good players to run some form of Marines. You know, almost definitely with 2 units of Desolation Marines as a minimum. I'd be very, you know, the thing about the UK meta is it adapts so quickly. And
rapid.
like the Desolation Marines were only out for a week, and then we had Manchester GT, where you know the top 10 players had more than 100 Desolation Marines between them. This is outrageous. I'd expect, because we have such a concentration of good players, they'll probably consider that most other good players will take some counters to Desolation Marines. And I don't think we'll quite see the same numbers that we saw at Manchester GT. I think that shock factor is gone and no one's going to run like 20 or 25 Desolation Marines. But the 2 units of 5 is really, really powerful, both in the mirror and also against the wider meta. And I'd expect to see kind of still a lot of diversity. I think people will start switching off the Dark Angels a bit and spread it out evenly between Iron Hands, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves. But I think they will still dominate the meta here. I don't think any other army is going to come up there. There may be little individual performances which kind of shine, but I think overall, if you're going to pick something to win the event, it's going to be one of the Marine factions.
Sadly, I think you're right, and I always say that whenever when Marines are winning super majors, the meta is awful because they do not know how to balance them at all. It's either like you have the Brohammer list where because what did with Brohammer you went on tabletop tactics, was it? And you redid the game with Lawrence.
Yeah. I ran that.
Oh, the unkillable dreadnoughts, Jesus. Yeah. Well, Vic, this brings it to the end of the show. Can you tell everyone about your podcast, where to find it, and what you talk about?
Yeah, sweet. So me and David Gaylord run the Fireside 40K podcast. You can find us on YouTube or any of your podcast streaming services. And we're up to episode, I think, 18 now. So there's quite a bit of content if you want to catch up on it. The latest one talking through the Manchester GT. We got Brian Seep on. If you want to know more about Desolation Marines, he does go through his list that he took undefeated through the event until the semifinals. So yeah, check it out. It's a very chilled out vibe, a bit of jazz music, and we just talk about our experiences, thoughts on the meta. Dave is super knowledgeable, so he kind of goes through his ideas as well from a slightly different viewpoint to me. And I think it works. We've got some good feedback from it, and yeah, we'd love to have you join us by the fireside, guys.
Yeah. So please go check out the podcast. Subscribe to Vic's channel. Subscribe down below as well, because all of you that are watching this, and if you watch Vic's channel as well, I'm sure you do, you don't subscribe. It's like 20% of people that watch the videos subscribe. So please subscribe to Vic's channel. Subscribe to my channel. Give comments in both of our channels. Let us know how we're doing, because we want feedback to improve and to know that you're enjoying it. So smash the like button, all that sort of stuff, and all the links from everything we talked about today, with the shout outs at the start, Vic's channel, and all of these tournaments we talked about, they're all going to be linked below. So all you have to do is click open. They're all going to be down below, and there you go. Right. Thanks, Vic, for coming on, and we'll see you in the next one.
Cheers,
see you later.
guys. Take care.